Hello and welcome to the channel where we discuss medical topics and lifestyle. In today's video, we are talking about alcohol, your gut, and your phone. So in particular, we're talking about how alcohol plays a role on the gut. And we're also going to talk about a unique study that was done, which features an app and whether that can be used in prevention of worsening alcohol habits. Alcohol use in the world is very prominent, and there are already a wide variety of evidence-based policies and interventions that are readily available to reduce the harm from alcohol. So we're going to be talking about another one here. But first, let's talk about how alcohol impacts your gut, both in the short term and the long term. So too much alcohol is bad for everyone, but in this particular video, we're going to be talking about alcohol and its relationship and impact on students, because they're a particular proportion of the population that is prone to drinking quite a bit as well because of the lifestyle that being a student entails. So unhealthy alcohol use is the consumption increasing the risks of health consequences. It's an important public health problem. It's a leading cause of morbidity and mortality, and unhealthy alcohol use is the leading health risk factor among people aged 15 to 49. Like we said, when we talk about students in particular, we can see that the prevalence is much higher in students as opposed to non-students. So 33% versus 27.7 and 8% versus 6.4. And 50% of students aged 19-20 who have drunk have experienced an adverse effect over 12 months. So it's very important to note that. Now, before we jump into what application and what phone intervention was used for the students, let's talk about what alcohol does to the gut. So alcohol does a lot of things to the entire body as a whole, especially chronic use of it, but we're focusing in on what it does to the gut in this video. We've all faced some troublesome gut symptoms after a night of drinking, but what does it do on a short term and a long term? So we can split it up into a few categories. Inflammation is the first thing. So it disrupts the microbiome. It's associated with reduced production of anti-inflammatory short chain fatty acids. So those are very important. And then that causes a more permeable and leaky gut. So that's very important. This is particularly important because too much inflammation in turn then can trigger an increase in bodily inflammation, which causes a lot of trouble. The next thing that alcohol does is it causes upset. So it's not the short chain fatty acid loss that causes loose watery diarrhea. It's the upset. So it disrupts the gut motility. It can cause extreme diarrhea, but it can also slow things down because it's a diuretic as well. So this is something to consider. And then also it can irritate. It can irritate the bowel, it can irritate reflux symptoms, it can irritate symptoms of IBS and IBD and so on. So that's what alcohol does on a short-term basis. On a long-term basis, just think all of these things, but much, much worse. I mean, we won't go into this video, but we can talk about the liver, the brain, and so on. But not all is lost. So studies show that an occasional glass of red wine is all right to take because of the polyphenols, because they're very high in antioxidant. And so the big question now is, how can smartphones help? So how can apps help? And the big question of this video is, can a smartphone-based intervention affect students' unhealthy alcohol use? So there's a study that was done that we're going to talk about now in a minute, and it was a randomized control study in 2001-2022. And this study took about 2,000 students, so equal amount, 900 male, 900 female, and the average age was about 22 and a half. And half of them had the intervention, so had the smartphone-based intervention, and half of them did not. They were the control group. So that's what we're talking about here. And what they measured was the number of standard drinks per week and the number of heavy drinking days that the students had. They measured this over 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. And what they actually concluded out of this study is that, first of all, there was a good feedback from it, but what they concluded was that there was quite a bit of success. So basically, that the access to a smartphone-based secondary prevention intervention reduced the alcohol use among university students who reported unhealthy alcohol use. So that's really positive. They didn't quit drinking or anything like that, but it reduced the amounts. So what are the limitations of this, and what is the context in this? One important thing to consider here is that there wasn't a million students tested. It was just around 2,000 students, so the sample size is there. But also another thing is that it was a self-reported measure, so the students gave their own feedback. It wasn't strictly controlled in that sense, so was there a little bit of bias there? Perhaps. But it's also important to note that the existing digital alcohol interventions are fairly low intensity. So these aren't heavy alcoholics, these students. So the compliance of using the app is questionable, right? Because if you're having worse alcoholic behavior, then you're going to seek more advanced treatment and options for it, right? You're not going to use this app per se. So was a good intervention, but there are limitations on it. Now, the app was interestingly made. It was obviously evidently based made, and it was made to make the student comply more with it. So it was very engaging, it was game like, and things like that. So it was really positive in that sense. So there wasn't an issue there. So, what can we conclude out of all of this? So, the interventions are no quick fix. That's what we can conclude basically. The WHO wants a target of 20% relative risk reduction by 2030, which is quite a big ask. And essentially, how you're going to achieve it is through the prevention scheme. So there's three ways of preventing something. You can have primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. So the primary prevention is a population level control. So that's like taxing your alcohol when you buy it. The secondary prevention is an example of that is this app. So these intervention-based models that try and prevent a person from having even worse alcoholic behavior. So the students in this model were a good example. So there are some risky behavior there, and we try to shut it down basically and nip it in the bud before it starts. And then we have tertiary prevention. So this is after, unfortunately, the events have already occurred, and it's more the relapse management side of things. And there we basically have it. So that was a nice video. I hope you learned something about how alcohol affects the gut in a short term and a long term, who are some risk groups, and also how digital technology is aiming to help solve this problem. And by the way, there is more funding for this, and it's going to be more and more widespread. Like and subscribe for more. See you in the next video.